Spare. Along came a spider. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We're now into part 3 of Spare. This part, getting the title Captain of My Soul, and accompanies a picture of the gruesome twosome embracing somewhere, possibly Africa. Now, whilst this publication is rather tedious, the fact is we're probably now entering what is the most interesting aspect of it, because along came the spider, Harry's wife. Not because she's interesting, but because her involvement provides us with an excellent opportunity to understand more about the way that her narcissism functions, the way that she has entered the life of Harry, the way that he, as a victim, recounts all of this. And it's fair to say, you will probably spend a lot of your time going, that's actually her, that's actually her, that's actually her, where you detect that she's behind what has been written. It starts as follows. I was sitting around Not Caught, scrolling through Instagram. In my feed I saw a video, my friend Violet, and a young woman. They were playing with a new app that puts silly filters on your photos. Violet and the woman had dog ears, dog noses, long red dog tongues, hanging out. Despite the canine cartoon overlay, I sat up straighter. This woman with Violet, my God. Now, is Harry going to say, my God, she looks ridiculous? A grown woman there with a dog filter on her face? Pathetic. He carries on. I watched the video several times, then forced myself to put down the phone. Then picked it up again, watched the video again. I travelled the world from top to bottom, literally, and I'd never met a nice South African. Oh, I'm sorry, he thought he was going to launch into the spitting image song. I've travelled this old world of ours, from Barnsley to Peru. I've had sunstroke in the Arctic and a swim in Timbuktu. I've seen unicorns in Burma and a yeti in Nepal, and I've danced with 10-foot pygmies in a Montezuma hall. I've met the King of China and the working Yorkshire miner, but I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And that's not bloody surprising, man, 'cause we're a bunch of arrogant bastards who hate black people. I once got served in Woolies. After less than 4 weeks' wait, I had lunch with Rowan Atkinson when he paid and wasn't late. I know a public swimming bath where they don't piss in the pool. I know a guy who got a job straight after leaving school. I've met a normal merman and a fairly modest German, but I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And that's not bloody surprising, man, 'cause we're a bunch of talentless murderers who smell like baboons. I've had a close encounter of the 22nd kind. That's when an alien ship disappears up your behind. I got director inquiries after less than 40 rings. I've even heard a decent song by Paul McCartney's Wings. I've seen a flying pig in a quite convincing wig, but I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And that's not bloody surprising, man, 'cause we're a bunch of ignorant loudmouths with no sense of humour. I've met the Loch Ness Monster, and he looks like Fred Astaire. At the BBC in London, he's the Chief Commissioner. I know a place in Glasgow which is rife with daffodillies. I met a man in Kathmandu who claimed to have 2 willies. I've had a nice pot noodle, but I've never had a poodle, and I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And that's not bloody surprising, man, because we've never met one either, except for Brighton back, and he's emigrated to Paris. Yes, he's quite a nice South African, and he's hardly ever killed anyone, and he's not smelly at all. That's why we put him in prison. Now, of course, all of that, a bit of a joke from Spitting Image, taking the piss out of the apartheid regime back then. But the way that Harry started off saying, I travel the world from top to bottom, I thought he was going to launch into that song also. A little diversion for you there. But he explains that he hopscotched the continents. He'd met hundreds of thousands of people. He'd crossed paths with a ludicrously large cross-section of the planet's 7 billion residents. For 32 years, I'd watched a conveyor belt of faces pass by, and only a handful ever made me look twice. This woman stopped the conveyor belt. This woman smashed the conveyor belt to bits. I'd never seen anyone so beautiful. Oh, come on. We all know, Harry's wife, you've written this. It stinks. Look, you're not going to say that Harry's wife is necessarily a minger, but she's had plenty of work done. But there are way more people that are more beautiful than she is. Come on. You only have to look at two of Harry's exes, Cressida and Chelsea Davy. Both of them are better looking than Harry's wife. So, as I say, you wouldn't necessarily describe her as a bag of hammers or a bulldog chewing a wasp. Far from it. To describe her as the most beautiful person that he'd ever seen. Fuck off. Now, of course, this is all written with a revision of history. And, of course, he's told that he has to write this, otherwise the old pink pods are going to get another zapping, aren't they? But the fact is, this is clearly the involvement of Harry's wife and shows the way that she has to influence the way that he sees her at the beginning. It would be far more credible if he saw her and thought, well, not bad. I'm slightly interested. But to think that he was utterly blown away by her really doesn't make any sense. And of course, this whole I saw her on Instagram seems to be an invention, because surely it was the case that they were set up on a blind date. So how would he know what she looked like beforehand? Perhaps somebody might have shown him a picture. But you seriously think someone who's got dog ears and a dog nose and a dog tongue is beautiful? Yeah, come on, Harry. He then went on to explain, why should beauty feel like a punch in the throat? Does it have something to do with our innate human longing for order? Harry, you're not that deep. Isn't that what scientists say and artists? That beauty is symmetry and therefore represents a relief from the chaos? This is word salad straight from the fingertips of Harry's wife. Of that there can be little doubt. Certainly my life to that point had been chaotic. I can't deny hungering for order. You were just hungering for spicy poontang, you randy ginger bastard. I'd just come back from a trip with Pa, Willie and Kate to France, where we'd marked the anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, honoured the British dead, and I'd read a haunted poem before action. It was published by a soldier 2 days before he died in action. It ended, "Help me to die, O Lord." Reading it out, I realised I didn't want to die, I wanted to live. A fairly staggering revelation for me just then. But this woman's beauty and my response to it wasn't based merely on symmetry. There was an energy about her. How do you know that from a picture? Bullshit. Again, this is Harry's wife rewriting history. A wild joy and playfulness. There was something in the way she smiled. How can you see her smile? She's got a fucking dog thing over her face. The way she interacted with Violet, the way she gazed into the camera, well, you'll see her doing plenty of that, matey boy. Confident, free. She believed that life was one grand adventure. Again, this is her rewriting all of this. There is no way that Harry would have thought that. If he found her attractive, this would have been Harry. Wouldn't mind smashing her back doors in. Oh, yeah. In a field behind a pub. Oh, yeah. Wonder what her bazookas are like. That would be what Harry was thinking. Not all of this shite about a wild joy and playfulness. And there's something in the way that she interacted with Violet and the way that she gazed into the camera. No man sits there coming out with that dross. This is the way that Harry's wife imagined the way that he thought about her, and therefore she has compelled him to write about it in these terms for the purposes, of course, of the revision of history, to make her sound fantastic and to demonstrate that he fell head over heels for her from the off. I got all of that from her face, her luminous, angelic face. Look, there are two words that you wouldn't use to describe Harry's wife's face. One is luminous and one is angelic. Bronze shiny, that might be one. Bearing a rictus grin, that could be another. But not luminous, and certainly not angelic. I never had a firm opinion on that burning question, he continues. Is there just one person on this earth for each of us? But in that moment, I felt there might be only one face for me. Hey, well, don't worry, Harry, she's got plenty of faces. Watch the Imitation Game video. So then he messages Violet asking who it is, And she answered straight away, answering, yes, I've had 6 other guys ask me. Bullshit! Again, this is Harry's wife wanting to demonstrate that every man wants to fuck her because that's what she thinks. He then asks who it is, and she's told that this person is an actress in a show called Suits. And then he asks what's she doing in London. He's told that she's here for the tennis. And why was she at Ralph Lauren? Because that's where Violet worked, and apparently Harry's wife was there for a fitting. And she suggested that she could connect the two of them if he wanted, and she said yes. And asked if it'd be okay to pass on his Instagram handle, and he said, yep, that's okay. He explains that it was Friday, July the 1st, and he was due to leave London the next morning, and he was going to take place in a sailing race around the Isle of Wight. And therefore, just as he was stuffing his stuff into an overnight bag, he kept glancing at his phone. And then he saw that he'd got a message on Instagram from the woman, from the American. Here comes the Hoover. She said that she got his information from Violet and complimented his Instagram page and the beautiful photographs. So already she's been looking through his Instagram, narcissism guiding her to assimilate information about him so that it can then be used for the purpose of assertion and control over him. And naturally, he's painted white. There's no reason that he's a problem. And she comes along with flattery as part of the initial assertion of control. He explains it was mostly photos of Africa, and he'd looked at her Instagram page and saw her hanging out with gorillas in Rwanda. And she said she'd done some aid work, and they shared some thoughts about Africa, photography, and travel. Here, of course, she's mirroring him for the purposes of cultivating control over him. Then they exchanged phone numbers, and then they went into texting, and the conversation went late into the night. Monopolization of time, incessant messaging, showing a sense of entitlement and lack of boundary recognition as she continues to hoover. He says the next day he moved from his residence to the car. There was no let-up in the texting. He said he texted with her throughout the long drive to Sir Keith's place, assuming he wasn't doing the driving there. And he continued to text. He arrived at Sir Keith's place, said hello, and then went into the guest room where he locked the door, and he said he remained there texting like a teenager until it was time to have dinner with Sir Keith and his family. Already notice how she's influencing his behaviour with regard to other people. Rather than showing good manners and going down to speak to his host, he stays up there texting her as she monopolises his time, hoovering. And then after dinner, he quickly went back to the guest room and carried on texting. He explained, I couldn't type fast enough. My thumbs were cramping. There was so much to say. We had so much in common, mirroring, though we came from such different worlds. She was American, I was British. Well done, Harry, you've worked that out. She was well educated. Well, I was decidedly not. She was free as a bird. I was in a gilded cage. Yeah, and you just swapped one for another one. And yet none of these differences felt disqualifying or even important. On the contrary, they felt organic, energising. Again, Harry's not doing this. He'll be thinking, send nudes, show us your tits. Not going on about this feels organic and energising. What a load of bollocks. The contradictions created a sense of, hey, I know you. There's a red flag. And, hey, I've known you forever. There's another red flag. Hey, thank God you've arrived, saviour. Another red flag. He explained that he would walk over to the window and look out over the estuary, and the view made him think of the Okavango. It made him think of that destiny and serendipity. Again, this is Harry's wife writing the Mills and Boon novel as she imagines her heroic prince stood there gazing out, conjuring up images of Africa as he texts her, whereas rather he sat there with a semi-lob on thinking, I wonder if I can get her into doing a bit of dirty talk. And then he explained that the marathon conversation began on July the 1st, 2016, which was his mother's 55th birthday. Once again, he has to bring up his mother. And then he'd explained that he would put her name into Google, and there were hundreds of photos, and he wondered if she was Googling him, and said he hoped not. Of course she was. Any narcissist would be doing that. And then he asked her how long she was going to be in London, and she said she was going back soon. So he asked if he could see her before she left. And then she said yes. And they then touched on where would they meet, and he suggested his place. And she said, on a first date, I don't think so. He said, I don't mean it like that. And he was explaining, well, I can't just meet you in a coffee shop or a pub. And he tried to explain about being seen, but didn't do a very good job. So she, asserting control, suggested an alternative. So her house at 76 Dean Street. It was her headquarters whenever she came to London. She'd reserve us a table in a quiet room. No one else would be around. The table would be under her name, and he finally mentions who her name is. What's quite funny is throughout he just refers to her as the American, as if we don't know who the fuck she is, trying to cultivate this mystery. And of course, this opening is quite clearly all created by her. We see the way that she's hoovering him. We see the way that she's asserting control over him. We see the way that she's doing all of this, all for the purposes of bringing him under control. And the way that her deluded mind believes that it is this amazing romantic beginning, which of course is the infatuation of the narcissist in the golden period. So along came a spider. Join me in the next section as we see that he gets a right good hoovering from her.